Don't tell him who cleaned his suite, Clara whispered, staring at her reflection in a housekeeping cart mirror. If Alexander Reed recognizes me before I'm ready, everything falls apart. 3 months earlier, she had lived in a penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. Today, 7 months pregnant, she pushed a cart full of fresh towels through the marble corridors of the Grand Crescent Hotel. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. Guests hurried past without looking at her twice. To them, she was invisible. Just another employee in a Navy housekeeping uniform. Just another woman making barely enough to survive. Nobody would have guessed she used to be the wife of one of the richest hotel owners in the state. Nobody would have guessed the baby she carried belonged to the same millionaire who now believed she had disappeared from his life forever. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Clara adjusted her name tag and stepped inside. Her lower back ached. The pregnancy had become harder during the past few weeks, but missing a shift wasn't an option. Rent was due in 6 days. Medical bills were stacked on her kitchen table. Every dollar mattered. As the elevator climbed toward the executive floors, Clara glanced at her wedding ring. She no longer wore it on her finger. Instead, it hung from a thin silver chain around her neck, hidden beneath her uniform. Some habits were harder to break than others. The elevator stopped on the 20th floor. Clara pushed her cart into a silent hallway lined with expensive artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain tapped gently against the glass. Chicago looked gray and distant beneath the storm clouds. She checked her clipboard. Presidential Suite 2001. Her final room before lunch break. The door stood slightly open. Strange. Housekeeping protocol required guests to secure the room. Clara hesitated. Then she knocked lightly. No answer. Housekeeping, she called. Silence. She stepped inside. The suite was immaculate. Too immaculate. No luggage. No room service trays. No signs anyone had stayed there overnight. Yet according to the system, the room had been occupied since yesterday afternoon. A chill crawled up her spine. Something felt wrong. Clara turned toward the living area. That was when she noticed the envelope. It sat alone on the coffee table. Cream-colored. Expensive. Deliberately placed. Her name was written across the front in black ink. Clara Bennett. Her pulse quickened. She looked around the suite. Empty. Quiet. Rain tapping against the windows. Slowly, she picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled. Very few people knew she worked here. Fewer still knew her schedule. She opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet inside. The message contained only one sentence. He knows about the baby. Clara froze. The words seemed to echo through the silent room. He knows about the baby, not Alexander. He had always known the child was his. This message referred to someone else. Someone Clara had spent months trying to avoid. Someone dangerous enough to make her leave her old life behind without explanation. Her breathing became shallow. Suddenly, the suite door opened behind her. Clara spun around. A man stepped into the room. Tall, impeccably dressed, rainwater still clinging to his coat. For a second, neither of them moved. Then the color drained from his face. Alexander Reed stared at the housekeeping uniform, at the pregnancy he hadn't seen before, at the woman he thought had vanished. The room became impossibly quiet. Clara, he said. She hadn't heard her name in his voice for 93 days. And judging by the look in his eyes, what he had just discovered was about to destroy everything he thought he knew. Alexander Reed stared at her as if the world had tilted beneath his feet. For 3 months, he had searched for answers he never admitted he wanted. 3 months of unanswered calls, disconnected numbers, and sleepless nights he blamed on work. Yet here she was, standing in front of him, wearing a housekeeping uniform instead of the elegant dresses she used to wear at charity galas. Clara's first instinct was to hide the envelope, but it was too late. Alexander had already noticed it in her trembling hand. His eyes moved from the paper to her face, and then to the curve of her stomach. Something changed in his expression. The confidence that usually followed him into every room seemed to vanish. "You are working here?" he asked quietly. Clara forced herself to stay calm. "I was working here until about 30 seconds ago." The answer landed harder than she intended. Alexander looked around the suite as though searching for an explanation hidden somewhere between the furniture and the silence. "Why did you leave?" Clara almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the question felt unbelievable. "You told me to leave, Alexander. Remember?" He lowered his eyes. Outside, rain continued tapping against the windows. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander noticed the envelope again. What is that? Clara folded the paper before he could read it. Nothing that concerns you. The response only deepened the worry on his face. Alexander Reed was a man accustomed to knowing everything. Every contract, every negotiation, every number. Uncertainty did not fit him well. Clara, I have spent weeks trying to understand what happened. Then you should have started 3 months ago. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Alexander inhaled slowly. She could see the guilt now. Real guilt. Not the polished version people displayed in public interviews. This looked heavier, more human. Yet guilt changed nothing. A phone buzzed suddenly. Clara flinched. The sound came from her pocket. An unknown number. Her heartbeat accelerated instantly. Alexander noticed. Who is calling you? Nobody. She rejected the call so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. Because it was. The same number had appeared 4 times this week. Every time it appeared, she felt the same knot in her stomach. Alexander studied her carefully. You are scared. I am careful. Those are not the same thing. Clara looked away. Unfortunately, he was right. Before she could answer, another sound interrupted them. A knock at the suite door. 3 slow knocks. Deliberate. Clara's face drained of color. Alexander saw it immediately. Whoever stood outside, Clara recognized the pattern. The knock came again. 3 slow taps. The envelope suddenly felt heavier in her hand. He knows about the baby. Alexander stepped toward the door. Clara grabbed his sleeve. Do not open it. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Alexander froze. During their marriage, she had rarely sounded afraid. Concerned. Frustrated. Heartbroken. Yes, but not afraid. This was different. Who is out there? He asked. Clara shook her head. I do not know. It was technically true. She did not know who had delivered the message. She only knew someone had been watching her. Someone who knew where she worked. Someone who knew about the child. The knock came a 3rd time. Then silence. Alexander opened the door anyway. The hallway was empty. No guest. No employee. No security guard. Nothing. Only a small black gift box resting on the carpet directly outside the suite. Alexander slowly picked it up. Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. The box contained no note. No card. Only a tiny silver baby rattle and a photograph. Alexander turned the picture over. The color disappeared from his face. It was a recent photograph of Clara leaving her apartment 2 nights earlier. Someone had taken it from across the street. And written across the bottom in black marker were 6 words that changed everything. You found her. Now stay away. Alexander stared at the photograph for several seconds without speaking. The rain outside seemed louder now, filling the silence that neither of them knew how to break. Finally, he looked up at Clara. How long has this been happening? Clara folded her arms instinctively across her stomach. Long enough. That answer only made his expression darker. He examined the photograph again. It had been taken recently. The angle was high, almost professional. Whoever captured it had known exactly where Clara would be and exactly when she would leave her apartment. Why did you not tell the police? Alexander asked. Clara gave a tired smile that held no humor. And tell them what? That someone leaves messages and photographs? They would ask for proof. They would ask who I think it is. Do you know who it is? She hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Alexander noticed immediately. During their marriage, he had learned to read every small change in her expression. You do know. Clara looked toward the window. Chicago's skyline shimmered behind sheets of rain. I know who it might be. Who? Another pause. Someone from before I met you. The answer surprised him. For months, he had assumed every mystery in Clara's life began and ended with him. Suddenly, he realized there were entire chapters of her story he had never bothered to understand. What does that mean? Alexander asked quietly. Clara walked to the edge of the suite and lowered herself carefully into a chair. The long shift, the stress, and the pregnancy were finally catching up to her. Before I met you, I worked for a financial consulting firm in Milwaukee. Alexander nodded. He vaguely remembered hearing that years ago. One of our clients was under federal investigation. Nobody knew at first. By the time the truth came out, several employees had already been questioned. Including you? Clara nodded. I helped organize records. Nothing illegal. Nothing important. But someone believed I knew more than I did. Alexander sat across from her. And you never told me this? Clara laughed softly. You never asked. The words landed harder than she intended. Again, Alexander looked away. Unfortunately, she was right. In the beginning, he had been fascinated by her kindness, her intelligence, her ability to make every room feel warmer. Somewhere along the way, he stopped asking questions. He assumed he already knew everything worth knowing. His phone suddenly vibrated. The screen lit up with a familiar name. Vanessa Monroe. Alexander ignored it. A second later, another call came. Then another. Clara noticed. She still calls a lot. Alexander immediately silenced the device. Not anymore. The certainty in his voice surprised even him. Before Clara could respond, another notification appeared. This time it was not a call. It was an email. Alexander frowned. The sender was anonymous. No name. No company. Just a string of random characters. Attached was a video file. The subject line contained only 4 words. Watch before it is deleted. A strange feeling settled over the room. Alexander opened the message. The video began playing. Security camera footage appeared on the screen. The date stamp made Clara's heart stop. 3 months ago. The night everything changed. The night Alexander accused her of betraying him. The footage showed a hallway inside the penthouse building where they used to live. Clara watched in disbelief as a familiar figure entered her apartment carrying a small folder. Vanessa. Neither of them spoke. The recording continued. Vanessa remained inside for less than 3 minutes before leaving. Then the screen froze. Attached beneath the video was another message. 1 sentence. This is only the beginning. Alexander felt the room tilt around him. Because for the first time since Clara disappeared, he was looking at proof that someone had carefully constructed the lie that destroyed their marriage. And whoever had just sent that video clearly wanted him to keep digging. Alexander replayed the video 3 times. Each viewing made the silence in the suite heavier. Vanessa had entered Clara's apartment on the exact night their marriage unraveled. The timestamp was impossible to ignore. The footage did not prove everything, but it shattered the foundation of what he thought he knew. Clara watched him carefully. For the first time since he walked into the room, she saw uncertainty replacing certainty. It was a strange sight. Alexander Reed had built a business empire by trusting his instincts. Yet those same instincts had failed him when it mattered most. His phone vibrated again. Vanessa. Another call. Then another. Alexander stared at the screen before finally turning the device completely off. Clara noticed. That is the first time I have ever seen you ignore her. Alexander exhaled slowly. That is the first time I have ever seen that video. The words hung between them. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city. Clara looked down at the envelope still resting beside her. Someone had delivered a warning. Someone had delivered proof. The question was why. Before either of them could speak again, another email notification appeared on Alexander's laptop. Same anonymous sender. Same strange string of characters. This time there was no attachment. Only a message. Check the storage unit. Unit 417. Alexander frowned. Storage unit? Clara looked equally confused. I have never rented one. Alexander stared at the screen. Then something clicked. 3 months ago, during the final weeks of their marriage, Vanessa had mentioned a storage facility owned by one of the hotel's vendors. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Now it suddenly felt important. Very important. I know where it is, Alexander said. Clara immediately shook her head. No. No. Every time one of these messages appears, something gets worse. Alexander studied her face. The fear was real. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. Real. You think this is a trap. I think somebody wants us to follow breadcrumbs. She paused. And I do not know where they lead. For a moment, Alexander considered walking away, calling security, handing everything to attorneys and investigators. That would have been the logical choice. But logic had already cost him too much. 3 months ago, he chose the easiest explanation instead of the hardest truth. He was not making that mistake again. I am going, he said quietly. Clara closed her eyes. Of course you are. 30 minutes later, rain covered the windshield of Alexander's SUV as they crossed downtown Chicago. Clara sat in the passenger seat, silent. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Neither spoke much. There was too much history in the car already. Too many unanswered questions. The storage facility sat on the edge of an industrial district near the river. Gray buildings. Empty parking lots. Security lights glowing against the storm. Unit 417 was located at the far end of the property. Alexander stepped out first. Clara followed more slowly. The metal door stood exactly where the email indicated. What surprised them was that it was already unlocked. Alexander exchanged a glance with Clara. Then he pulled the door open. Inside sat a single desk, a folding chair, and 6 cardboard boxes stacked neatly against the wall. Nothing else. No furniture. No personal belongings. Just boxes. Alexander opened the first one. Financial records. Hotel contracts. Internal reports. Thousands of pages. Clara opened another. Photographs. Receipts. Printed emails. Her pulse quickened. Someone had been collecting information for years. Not months. Years. Then Alexander discovered the final box. Unlike the others, it contained only one folder. Across the front, written in bold black letters, were 4 words that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the room. Operation Reed Divorce. Neither of them moved, because suddenly this was no longer about a misunderstanding. Someone had planned something far bigger than either of them imagined. Alexander opened the folder with hands that no longer felt steady. The fluorescent lights above them hummed softly as rain tapped against the metal roof of the storage facility. Clara stood beside him, one hand resting protectively against her stomach. Neither of them knew what they were about to find. The first page was a timeline. Dates. Locations. Notes. Hundreds of entries stretching back almost 4 years. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Every major event in their relationship appeared on those pages. Their engagement party. Their wedding. Business trips. Charity events. Family gatherings. Someone had documented everything. "This is impossible," Alexander whispered. Clara felt a chill run through her. The next section contained photographs. Most had been taken from a distance. Coffee shops. Restaurants. Hotel lobbies. Places they had visited together. Someone had been watching them for years without either of them noticing. Alexander turned another page. Then another. His expression changed. Confusion became disbelief. Several reports focused entirely on Vanessa Monroe. Detailed records of her meetings, phone calls, travel history, and financial transactions. Clara stepped closer. "What is it?" Alexander handed her a page. She scanned the document. One line immediately stood out. A payment. Large enough to draw attention. The money had been transferred from an offshore account into a consulting company 6 months before their marriage collapsed. Beneath the transaction was a handwritten note. Subject successfully positioned. Phase 2 approved. Clara looked up. "What does that mean?" Alexander did not answer immediately because he was already reading the next page. His face grew pale. The consulting company belonged to a man named Victor Hale. Clara recognized the name instantly. Her stomach tightened. "No." Alexander looked at her. "You know him?" Clara slowly nodded. "Victor Hale was the client I told you about. The one from Milwaukee." The room suddenly felt smaller. Alexander studied her expression. "The man who was investigated?" "Yes." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "And he blamed several employees when everything started falling apart." Alexander turned back to the file. Another photograph slipped from the folder and landed on the floor. Clara picked it up. The image had been taken at a hotel fundraiser nearly 3 years ago. Vanessa stood near the edge of the crowd speaking with a man whose face was partially turned away from the camera. Clara's breath caught instantly. "That is him." Alexander looked closer. "Victor Hale." Clara nodded. "I would recognize him anywhere." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The pieces were beginning to connect. Not completely. Not enough to reveal the whole picture. But enough to suggest something neither of them had considered before. Vanessa might never have acted alone. Alexander continued searching through the folder until he reached the final page. Unlike everything else, this document contained only a single sentence. There were no signatures, no dates, no explanations, just a message typed in bold black letters. "If you are reading this, someone inside Reed Hospitality is still helping them." Clara felt her heartbeat accelerate. Alexander read the sentence twice, then 3 times. Someone inside his company. Someone close enough to access schedules, records, and private information. Suddenly, the anonymous messages made more sense. So did the photograph outside Clara's apartment. Whoever was watching her had resources. Access. Reach. Alexander closed the folder and looked around the storage unit. For the first time all night, he felt something stronger than guilt. Determination. 3 months ago, he had failed Clara when she needed him most. He could not change that, but he could stop ignoring the truth. His phone vibrated unexpectedly. The device had remained off since they left the hotel, yet somehow it had powered back on. A new text message appeared on the screen. Unknown sender. Only 7 words. Check on Clara before it is too late. Both of them froze, because at that exact moment Clara suddenly pressed a hand against her stomach and winced. Alexander was beside her instantly. Clara. The concern in his voice sounded unfamiliar, almost foreign after months of distance and silence. Clara lowered herself carefully into the folding chair and took a slow breath. I am okay, she said, though neither of them fully believed it. The baby shifted again, stronger this time. Her doctor had warned her about stress. Long shifts, sleepless nights, constant anxiety. None of those things had disappeared. In fact, the last few hours had delivered more uncertainty than the previous 3 months combined. Alexander knelt beside her. We are leaving, Clara almost argued, but another glance at the text message changed her mind. Check on Clara before it is too late. Whoever was sending these messages seemed to know everything. Her location, Alexander's location, the storage unit, the files, the timing. It was unsettling in a way neither of them could ignore. 20 minutes later, they arrived at St. Matthew Medical Center. Rain continued falling outside as nurses guided Clara into an examination room. Alexander remained in the waiting area. The bright hospital lights reflected off polished floors. Families passed by carrying flowers, balloons, and coffee cups. Life continued around him while his own thoughts refused to settle. For the first time in years, business was not the center of his attention. Numbers did not matter. Contracts did not matter. Quarterly reports did not matter. Only Clara mattered. And the realization arrived too late to feel noble. Across the room, a television displayed financial news. Reed Hospitality's stock price scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Alexander barely noticed. His phone vibrated again. Another anonymous message. This time there was no warning. Only a photograph. Alexander stared at it. The image showed Clara sitting in the hospital room only minutes earlier. The angle suggested it had been taken from somewhere inside the building. His blood ran cold. Whoever was watching them was closer than ever. Much closer. Before he could react, a doctor stepped into the waiting area. Mr. Reed. Alexander stood immediately. How is she? The doctor smiled reassuringly. She and the baby are doing well. Exhaustion and stress. Nothing more serious than that. Alexander released a breath he had not realized he was holding. The doctor handed him a folder. These are routine reports. She will need more rest going forward. Alexander thanked him and accepted the documents. As he opened the folder, a loose paper slipped free and landed on the floor. He bent down to retrieve it, then froze. The page was not part of Clara's medical records. Someone had inserted it afterward. Typed across the center in bold letters were 6 words. She trusted you once. Do not fail again. Alexander stared at the message. No signature. No explanation. Yet somehow it felt personal. Very personal. Almost as if the anonymous sender knew exactly what haunted him most. Meanwhile, inside the examination room, Clara sat quietly near the window. The storm outside had begun to weaken. Soft city lights glowed beyond the glass. A nurse entered carrying a clipboard. You have a visitor, she said. Clara frowned. I am not expecting anyone. The nurse looked confused. The gentleman said he was family. Clara's pulse quickened. She had very little family left in Chicago. What is his name? The nurse checked the visitor log. Her expression changed instantly. That is strange. What? Clara asked. The nurse looked back at her. There is no name written here. At that exact moment, a shadow appeared beyond the frosted glass door. Someone was standing outside the room, waiting, watching, and for reasons she could not explain, Clara suddenly remembered a face she had spent years trying to forget. Victor Hale. Clara could not take her eyes off the shadow behind the frosted glass. Logic told her she was overreacting. Stress could make ordinary moments feel threatening. But instinct told a different story. Instinct reminded her of Milwaukee, of whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, of executives who smiled in public and panicked in private, of Victor Hale. The nurse opened the door carefully. Both women looked toward the hallway. The shadow disappeared. Gone. Just like that. The corridor outside was empty except for a janitor pushing a cart and a doctor reviewing a tablet several yards away. The nurse frowned. Maybe they left. Clara nodded, though the explanation did not feel convincing. Meanwhile, Alexander stood near the waiting area windows, studying the anonymous photograph. Someone had taken a picture of Clara inside the hospital less than 10 minutes earlier. That meant one thing. Whoever was involved was not operating from a distance anymore. They were nearby. His phone vibrated once again. This time the message came from someone he actually knew. Ethan Brooks, head of corporate security for Reed Hospitality. One of the few people Alexander trusted completely. The text was brief. Call me now. Alexander stepped into a quiet corner and returned the call immediately. Ethan answered on the first ring. Where are you? St. Matthew. Silence. Then Ethan spoke again. Do not leave until I get there. Alexander straightened. Why? Another pause. Because someone accessed internal company records this afternoon. Alexander's pulse quickened. What records? Employee schedules. Hotel security logs. Medical insurance files. Alexander's grip tightened around the phone. Clara. Exactly. Ethan lowered his voice. And whoever accessed them used executive credentials. Alexander felt the pieces shifting again. Someone inside Reed Hospitality was helping Victor Hale's operation. The storage unit file had warned them. Now there was proof. 25 minutes later, Ethan arrived carrying a laptop bag and a stack of printed reports. Clara joined them in a private consultation room near the maternity wing. Rain still streaked the windows outside, though the storm had weakened considerably. Ethan spread documents across the table. The access logs were erased, he explained. But whoever did it made one mistake. Alexander looked up. What mistake? Ethan slid a report forward. They logged into the system from an executive office inside headquarters. Clara leaned closer. The report contained a room number. Executive Suite 31B. Alexander immediately recognized it. The office belonged to Vanessa Monroe. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Ethan opened his laptop and displayed another screen. Security footage from headquarters appeared. The timestamp showed earlier that afternoon. Vanessa entered her office alone. 20 minutes later, she left carrying a large folder. Nothing unusual. Then another figure appeared. A man wearing a baseball cap and dark coat entered using a temporary visitor badge. Clara stared at the screen. Her breath caught instantly. Stop. Ethan froze the video. Clara pointed at the man's profile. That is him. Alexander looked carefully. Victor Hale. Clara nodded. I am sure. The room fell silent. For months, Alexander had believed Vanessa acted out of ambition or jealousy. Now he realized she had been connected to something much larger. Something planned. Something deliberate. Ethan leaned back in his chair. There is more. He opened a final file. We traced several payments linked to Vanessa. Alexander's stomach tightened. The screen displayed transaction after transaction. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. Consulting fees. Then one number appeared. $2 million. Clara stared at it. Ethan pointed to the sender information. The money originated from an account controlled by Victor Hale. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Alexander looked at Clara. The guilt in his eyes was impossible to miss. 3 months ago, he had demanded explanations from her. He had questioned her honesty. He had doubted her character. All while the real answers were hidden in front of him. Before he could speak, another email notification appeared on Ethan's laptop. Anonymous sender. Same pattern. Same timing. Ethan opened it cautiously. A single attachment loaded onto the screen. It was a guest list. Tomorrow night. Grand Crescent Hotel Ballroom. Reed Hospitality Charity Gala. More than 500 guests would attend. Politicians. Investors. Journalists. Community leaders. At the bottom of the email was a final message. If you want the truth, be there when the lights go out. The next evening, the Grand Crescent Hotel glittered beneath thousands of crystal lights. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Reporters gathered near the red carpet. Inside the ballroom, more than 500 guests filled the room with conversation, laughter, and the familiar confidence of people who believed they understood exactly how the world worked. Alexander stood near the stage greeting investors and board members, but his attention never stayed in one place for long. He kept scanning the crowd, waiting, watching. Clara arrived 30 minutes later. She wore a simple navy maternity dress borrowed from a coworker at the hotel. No diamonds, no designer labels, no attempt to compete with anyone in the room. Yet when she entered, several heads turned. Not because of what she wore, because of the quiet strength she carried with her. Alexander noticed her immediately. For a moment, the noise of the ballroom seemed to fade. 3 months ago, he had allowed lies to define her. Tonight, he saw something different. A woman who had survived every consequence of his mistakes and still walked with dignity. Ethan approached carrying an earpiece. Security is in place, he said quietly. Every entrance. Every exit. If Victor Hale shows up, we will know. Alexander nodded. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Monroe appeared moments later wearing a silver evening gown and her usual confident smile. At first glance, she looked perfectly composed. But Alexander noticed the tension around her eyes. She knew something was coming. The anonymous email had reached more than one person. The charity presentation began at 8 o'clock. A large screen illuminated behind the stage. Applause filled the room as Alexander stepped forward to deliver opening remarks. Cameras flashed. Guests smiled. Everything appeared normal. Then exactly at 8:32, the ballroom lights went dark. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The giant screen flickered. For several seconds nothing happened. Then a video appeared. The room fell silent. Security footage. Hotel hallways. Office entrances. Private meetings. Date after date. Month after month. The images revealed Vanessa meeting Victor Hale repeatedly over several years. Murmurs spread through the audience. Investors exchanged confused looks. Journalists reached for phones. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Turn it off," she whispered. But nobody moved. The video continued. Financial records appeared next. Offshore transfers. Consulting agreements. Hidden payments. Then came the final recording. The same footage Alexander had seen in the hotel suite. Vanessa entering Clara's apartment 3 months earlier carrying a folder. Leaving minutes later. The ballroom erupted with shocked whispers. Clara stood perfectly still. Alexander looked toward her. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply watched the truth finally arrive. Then a new image appeared on the screen. Not a video. A live camera feed. The source seemed to be somewhere inside the hotel. A man sat alone in a private conference room upstairs. The moment Clara saw his face, she stopped breathing. Victor Hale. The room exploded with reactions. Guests stood. Security personnel moved instantly. Ethan spoke into his radio. Upstairs, Victor looked directly into the camera as if he expected the audience to be watching. Then he smiled. A calm, unsettling smile. Beside him rested a thick folder. Across the front were words every person in the ballroom could read. Read Hospitality, Internal Partners. Alexander felt his pulse hammer in his chest. Because suddenly this was no longer about Vanessa. No longer about the divorce. No longer even about Victor Hale. There were other names in that folder. Powerful names. People still hiding in plain sight. And somewhere inside the hotel, the man who had spent years orchestrating everything was waiting for them to come find him. Alexander, Ethan, and 2 security officers reached the conference room less than 3 minutes later. The door was unlocked. The room was empty. Victor Hale was gone. Only the thick folder remained on the table beneath a single lamp. Outside, the gala continued in stunned silence as guests watched events unfold through whispers, phone screens, and speculation. Ethan opened the folder carefully. Inside were names, emails, financial records, and years of correspondence. Some belonged to executives. Some belonged to consultants. Others belonged to people Alexander had trusted for years. The evidence revealed a network of individuals who had quietly exchanged information, manipulated reports, and protected Victor Hale's interests long after his public downfall. Yet one detail stood out above all the others. A handwritten note rested inside the final section. Alexander recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to Victor. The message was surprisingly short. You spent years building hotels. I spent years building revenge. But someone changed the ending. Beneath the note was a flash drive. Ethan connected it to his laptop. A video appeared. Victor sat in a chair facing the camera. He looked older than Clara remembered. Tired. Defeated, even. He stared into the lens for several seconds before speaking. If you are watching this, then the truth is already public. His voice was calm. Years ago, I convinced myself that Clara Bennett had ruined my life. I needed someone to blame. Someone to carry the weight of my failures. Clara watched from the ballroom monitor below. Her eyes never left the screen. Victor continued. The investigation was my fault. The decisions were my fault. But anger is easier than accountability. So I built a story. Then I found people willing to profit from it. Images flashed across the screen. Financial transactions. Messages. Meetings. Vanessa appeared repeatedly. Victor lowered his eyes. What began as resentment became obsession. I told myself I wanted justice. What I really wanted was control. The room remained silent. Hundreds of people listened. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. Then Victor said something that Alexander would remember for the rest of his life. The person who stopped me was not a lawyer, not a judge, not an investigator. It was the woman I tried to break. She survived. She kept moving forward. And eventually that became stronger than anything I could do. The video ended. No dramatic finale. No excuses. Just silence. Ethan immediately handed the evidence to federal investigators who had arrived during the gala. Vanessa was escorted away for questioning. Several executives resigned before sunrise. News outlets covered the story for weeks. Investors demanded reforms. Audits followed. Careers changed overnight. Yet none of those headlines mattered much to Clara. 2 months later, on a bright autumn morning, she sat beside a hospital window holding her newborn daughter. Sunlight filled the room. The city looked completely different without rain. Alexander stood quietly nearby, not because he assumed he belonged there, because Clara had allowed him to be there. The difference mattered. Rebuilding trust had been slow, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes uncertain. There were difficult conversations, honest apologies, long stretches where words failed completely. But for the first time, both of them were dealing with reality instead of assumptions. Alexander looked down at his daughter sleeping peacefully in Clara's arms. "She has your eyes," he said softly. Clara smiled. Too early to tell. He laughed quietly. The sound surprised both of them. A nurse entered carrying discharge paperwork. Life was moving forward. Ordinary things suddenly felt extraordinary. Before leaving the room, Alexander paused near the window. Months earlier, he had found Clara cleaning hotel floors while carrying a future he never bothered to understand. He thought money solved problems. He thought confidence meant certainty. He thought success meant control. He had been wrong about all three. Clara adjusted the blanket around their daughter and looked toward him. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander glanced back at her, then at the child, then at the city beyond the glass. That some people lose what matters most because they believe the wrong story. Clara held his gaze for a moment. And some people find their way back when they finally learn the truth. Outside, the morning sun continued rising over Chicago. Inside, nobody needed another speech, another explanation, or another victory. The truth had already done its work.